Hello everyone, welcome to Options with Doug, streaming live on Monday and Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, a Bookmap Discord and the Bookmap YouTube channel. Note that is my normal schedule this week. Of course, I'm streaming at 2 p.m. today on Wednesday, and then I will also be streaming on Friday, starting at my normal time, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Before I get started, I need to go through the disclosures. General disclosure, all Bookmap Limited materials, information, and presentations are for educational purposes only and should not be considered specific investment advice nor recommendations. Risk disclosure, trading futures, equities, and options involves substantial risk of loss and is not suitable for all investors. Past performance is not necessarily indicative of future results. Here's my contact information. The best way to get in touch with me is through Discord. My name on Discord is Doug P. Also in Bookmap Discord, there's an Options-Doug chat channel. You can post questions, comments, and content related to the topics of my presentation and the topics of the channel that I'll go through in just a moment. I'm also on X. My name there is @DougPless. And this special webinar should be ending shortly. Forgot to take that out of my slide deck. So it looks like it may be streaming on YouTube, so you can catch the recording if you did not see it. Here are the key tenets to my approach to trading. I believe that options trades and market maker hedging activity are key drivers of price of many stocks and futures. That certainly applies to large cap tech stocks, as well as the equity index futures like the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq 100. And for the S&P 500, SPX is the underlying index, SPY is the ETF version of the index, and the ES futures contract is a derivative of SPX. And whether you're trading SPX, SPY, or ES, key SPX and SPY levels are very important. And we'll see plenty of examples of that today. And for the Nasdaq 100, NDX is the underlying index. QQQ is the much more liquid ETF version of the index. And the NQ futures contract is a derivative of NDX. And just like the S&P 500, when traders buy and sell puts and calls in NDX and QQQ, market makers take the opposite side of those trades and they hedge their delta exposure with NQ futures. The focus of my presentation today and the focus of the Options-Doug chat channel is options order flow, the impact of options markets on stocks and futures, and the influence of market maker hedging flow on price action. I have a two-step process for trading, and the first is planning, and I use positional analysis. I look at how traders and market makers are positioned in the options market and how those positions change from day to day to develop a thesis regarding the expected trading range and volatility for the day, as well as the directional bias. And the second step in my process is execution. I look at real-time order flow in Bookmap and real-time market maker hedging flow in SpotGamma Hero to confirm my thesis and for setups. And when I talk about setups today, I will be focusing on an underlying asset. Setups in that asset can be taken with futures contracts, shares of stock, or options, depending on the asset as well as the way you like to trade. Questions and comments are welcome, and I will be watching both the Options-Doug chat channel as well as the chat and YouTube for your questions and comments. Please feel free to post. I'll do my best to answer your questions. Here's my agenda for today, Wednesday, January 21st. First of all, I want to go over news items, economic data, events, and earnings for today as well as the rest of the week. Then I'll go through my positional analysis. Then I'll review some setups from earlier today. Then I'll take a look at the live market. And when I get to the live market, if anyone has any stocks they want me to take a look at, please let me know and I'll be glad to do that. All right, let's start with news items. And while we do that, let's take a look at the S&P 500, ES futures and Bookmap. Pretty volatile day today. So over the weekend, of course, the Greenland news came out. Trump was going to, is determined to acquire Greenland and is threatening tariffs on 8 European allies, and then the European allies are countering. And then this morning, Trump, speaking at Davos in Switzerland, said that he was not going to use force to acquire Greenland, and that sparked a very sharp rally. So let's go back. So overnight, there was some weakness in the S&P 500 ES futures. And then this is when the news came out, right around 8:40, when Trump began speaking at Davos and lifted the ES futures. We'll see the Nasdaq as well, many stocks, quite a bit based on that news. And then we'll take a look at what was resistance up here. And at first glance, it appears to be the 685 large gamma 3. That's also the volatility trigger in SPY. There was also positive gamma, and SPX made it right up to that level. All right, so that is news. We'll talk about more about the S&P 500 in just a minute. Also this morning was VIX expiration. Tomorrow there's some economic data coming out that could be important. 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, GDP data comes out. And then at 10 a.m., PCE data. That's inflation data. And then on Friday, 9:45 a.m., S&P Global PMI data comes out. All right, so those are the data releases for the rest of the week. And who knows what's going to happen in between now and then. All right, so that is the news for the week. All right, so let's move on to positional analysis. So again, this is the ES futures and Bookmap, and I have key levels on this chart. I know there are a lot of levels. We'll isolate the underlying index components in just a minute, which is SPX and SPY. So first of all, SPY levels. So earlier, before the cash open, the SPY 676, just around our level, acted as support. Then after the Trump-induced rally, ES rallied all the way up to, again, the SPY 685, large gamma 3 volatility trigger level. And that was also, again, a spot gamma level, a gamma level, high positive gamma level. We'll see that on trace when we take a look at gamma in a couple of minutes. All right, in between, there's the SPX 6800 put wall, and price was trading below that level earlier today. There's the SPY 680 absolute gamma strike. All right, so those key levels. So before I spend more time on this chart, let's step back. Let's take a look at our higher time frame. Let's start with SPX, the underlying index for the S&P 500. And SPX, starting last April, the rally began, and SPX continues to make new highs, and traders are buying every pullback. They're buying every dip so far, and today is no exception. All right, so that is the 1 day, 1 year chart. Now let's take a look at a shorter time frame. Let's go to a 30-day, 1 hour chart. And this is showing most recent pullbacks. They were getting smaller and smaller until the most recent couple of pullbacks, but again, traders buying every dip. And this looks like perhaps the first time SPX has not made a higher high after a pullback. Here's price action today. So yesterday, SPX traded down a little bit below 6,800. That is the put wall today, and the put wall did move down from yesterday. It was 6,900 yesterday, but that was a key spot gamma level. yesterday, right around 67.95. Large positive gamma around that level acted as support yesterday. And then again, the put wall did move lower. Gap up today, quick move higher after the Trump comments, and then a reversal lower, now consolidation. All right, let's take a look at the levels on this chart. First of all, we'll start with the expected moves. The dashed purple lines are showing the lower and upper weekly expected moves. This is based on the options market, based on the closing price for SPX from Friday. Those levels remain in place for the entire week. So note yesterday, SPX did break down below the lower weekly expected move, traded up above that level today, and is now back down below. All right, so that is the weekly expected move, again, based on the closing price for SPX from last Friday. Those levels remain in place for the entire week. Then the dashed blue lines are showing the lower and upper daily expected move, also based on the options market, based on the closing price for SPX from yesterday. So those levels change every day, and they can go beyond the bounds of the lower and upper weekly expected move, as happened yesterday, with the lower daily expected move below the lower weekly expected move. So earlier today, SPX did trade up above the upper daily expected move and is now trading down below that level, so within the range of the lower and upper daily expected move. All right, let's take a look at the spot gamma levels on this chart, and I'm going to focus on the key daily levels. So the first level is the put wall that I mentioned before at 6,800. SPX is trading above that level. That's a strike with large net negative gamma that can be expected to act as support. And above that is the volatility trigger at 69.25. That is SpotGamma's proprietary volatility and gamma flip level. Below that level, market makers' position on the gamma curve is negative. In a negative gamma environment, market makers have to trade with price to hedge their delta exposure. That tends to enhance or increase volatility. Above that level, market makers' position on the gamma curve is positive. In a positive gamma environment, market makers have to trade against price to hedge their delta exposure. That tends to subdue or decrease volatility. And that is based on SpotGamma's older total open interest model. We'll take a look at a view of gamma based on SpotGamma's newer synthetic open interest model that is more that updates during the day. All right, so SPX is trading below the volatility trigger at 69.25. All right, the next level up is the absolute gamma strike at 7,000. This strike with large absolute positive and negative gamma. That's where most of the gamma-weighted open interest is concentrated. And then finally, the call wall remains at 7,100. That's a strike with the largest net positive gamma that can be expected to act as resistance. And of course, well out of play for today. All right, so shifts in levels. For SPX, the volatility trigger and put wall both shifted lower, so that's a bearish brace for SPX. We'll take a look at SPY in just a minute. All right, let's wrap up our view of SPX with a 1-minute chart. All right, so yesterday, regular trading hours shown with the dark shaded portions. So you can see yesterday, downtrend broke down below 6,800, found support right around, there was positive gamma in the zone of 67.95 yesterday. Gap up today, rally up to this key level, 68.75. We'll see that in the trace gamma heat map in just a minute. Also that SPY 685 level. And then price moved down lower, down below the gap open. Didn't quite make it to the put wall, now grinding higher. And here's the volatility trigger that I mentioned before, well up above. So SPX trading just above the put wall. All right, that's SPX. And let's take a look at SPY. Let me zoom in on this. Actually, and today SPY did trade up above the highs from yesterday. Whoops. And then found resistance at the 685 volatility trigger. And is now trading down right at the 680 absolute gamma strike. So there's resistance at 685. And then right now, maybe support at the 680 absolute gamma strike. Looks like it may be trying, SPY may be trying to break down below that level. Maybe break out of this upward trending channel. All right, so that's SPY. And for SPY, the volatility trigger, put wall, and absolute gamma strike all shifted lower from yesterday. So that is a bearish hat trick for SPY. All right, so maybe finding support at that lower trend line and the 680 large gamma 1 level, or the absolute gamma strike. All right, back to Bookmap. All right, so I mentioned these levels before. 676 on the downside, 685 on the upside. And then key SPX levels, put wall, and that's it. All right. So again, SPY 680 absolute gamma strike. All right, note there's a difference in price between ES and SPX, and today that is right around 33 points. So I'm showing SPX 6800, the put wall, at ES 6833. There's also a SPY ES to SPY ratio, and I do post those index relationships that I'm using every day in Discord in the Options-Deck chat channel, along with the expected moves for SPX, ES, and NQ. All right, so that's the SP 500. We'll talk about setups in just a couple minutes. All right, let's take a look at Nasdaq now. Nasdaq, similar price action. Key level here, NDX 25,000, large gamma 2 level. So we'll see that in just a minute. I know there are a lot of lines on this chart. So let's step back. Let's take a look at the charts for the underlying indexes so we can isolate these levels and see what's see the important levels. We'll start with QQQ. So QQQ also traded above its highs from yesterday. So let's zoom in. All right, levels in play for QQQ. Earlier today, there was support right around this 606 round number level. And resistance up above the 616 level. So a 10-point move higher in QQQ. That's about a 400-point move higher in NQ. Sharp reversal lower. And now QQQ also making an upward trending channel. A few levels here. 610 large gamma 2 level. And then the 615 large gamma 4 level. All right, let's take a look at NDX. All right, key level for today, 25,000, large gamma 2 level. Note also this 25,200 large gamma 3 level acted as resistance. So there was a little bit of consolidation around that level before NDX rallied higher. And note also the volatility trigger is at 25,130. So key level for today, key support, 25,000 large gamma 2 level that I have shown right here with this red rectangle. And again, we'll take a look at setups in just a couple of minutes. All right, for Nasdaq, for NDX, the volatility trigger shifted lower. And for QQQ, the put wall and absolute gamma strike both shifted lower down to 600. So not in play for today. All right, that's Nasdaq. Again, we'll talk about the setups in just a minute. All right, so let's wrap up our positional analysis by taking a look at gamma. So we're going to go to the Trace Gamma heat map. This is available to SpotGamma subscribers. So what we've looked at so far, the levels are based on static data. That's open interest data that's updated once a day. Those levels remain in place for the entire day. Then now we're taking a look at a view of gamma. This is market maker's gamma position that's updated every 10 minutes. Red shading shows negative gamma, and blue shading, there is not really any blue shading here, shows positive gamma. So in negative gamma, we're looking for higher volatility, faster movement, a wider range of movement. And a positive gamma, we're looking for lower volatility, more mean reverting price action. All right, so let's step back in time just a little bit. We'll go back to just 10 minutes after the open and step through time. So at this point, we already know SPX is moving higher in reaction to news about Trump's speech in Davos. So we can see this large positive gamma strike building at 68.75. So this indicates traders are selling calls, market makers are buying calls, and as price approaches, and these are most likely a zero TTE, gamma increases. So step through time, see the gamma exposure at 68.75 was building. Price makes it all the way up to that level, then starts to reverse after hitting that positive gamma. And now that positive gamma, as price moves away, has diminished quite a bit. So that was a beautiful long setup this morning with a very clear price target. Let's step back in time again. Very clear price target that appeared right around 950. All right, so now there's just a little bit of positive gamma down below, but mostly negative gamma red shading throughout the range on the chart. Stability index is at a very low 0%. It doesn't get any lower. All right, so still looking for higher volatility in the next 30, 60 minutes. All right, so let's move on. Let's take a look at some setups now. So I'm going to start with the S&P 500, and I'm going to start by taking a look at what options traders have been doing today. This is the SpotGamma Hero indicator. It's available to SpotGamma subscribers. And this is the S&P 500 Index Hero signal. What this is showing is options trades and market maker hedging activity for the S&P 500 index components. We've already taken a look at a couple of those. That is SPY, and SPX. This also includes options trades and market maker hedging activity for ES futures, and XSP. The white line is price for SPX, and the purple line is the hero signal. And a rising hero signal indicates traders are taking positive delta options positions. They're buying calls and selling puts. We'll see that in just a moment. And then a falling hero signal indicates traders are taking negative delta positions. They're buying puts and selling calls. And let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to shift to puts and calls. Orange line shows calls, blue line shows puts. Direction of the line indicates options delta. So rising lines indicate positive delta. Orange line rising, traders buying calls, market makers sell the calls. Blue line rising indicates traders are selling puts, market makers buy the puts. In both cases, they have to buy futures to hedge their delta exposure. All right, so that is the S&P 500 index signal. We can also take a look at the S&P 500 equity signal, and it is painting a similar picture. Traders were selling calls a few minutes after the open, and there was really about somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes of chop this morning, and then traders, they were already selling puts, equity puts. This is the S&P 500 equity signal showing options trades and market maker hedging activity for all 500 stocks in the S&P 500 index. Traders were selling puts. Just a few minutes later, 15 minutes later, started buying calls. Price moved higher. And then the call buyers took their foot off the gas after the S&P 500 started to move lower. But they did stop selling puts right at the same time, or maybe a couple minutes before price started to move lower. All right, so that's the S&P 500 equity signal. Let's go back to the S&P 500 equity index signal. And to me, this looks like it was more of a leading indicator for this move lower. Traders started selling calls, buying puts, and looks like S&P 500 started to reverse lower right around there. But the move of the day, of course, was the rally from not quite from the open, starting right around 9:42 as traders started selling puts. Call buyers came in just a couple of minutes later and drove price higher. And again, remember that positive gamma target began to form. We could see it the first time at 9:50 on the trace gamma heat map. All right, so let's go to Bookmap now. So let's zoom in on this. Let's go back to the S&P 500. Oh, so more news must have come out. All right, so let's take a quick look at this, then we'll see what's going on in the market now. So here's the move this morning. First move after the news, somewhere, I think it was closer to here, 8:30, 8:40. Chop after the open. Traders started selling puts, buying calls. Price moved higher. Up here shown on the chart, the 685 level. And then, of course, again, the spot gamma, the gamma, large positive gamma level at 68.75. Looking at the subchart here, you can see aggressive buyers moving price higher. That's shown by the magenta to dark blue line. That's cumulative volume delta. Also buy stop orders helping to fuel that move higher. Large traders were fading the move with iceberg orders. Looks like they got paid later on. More passive sellers coming in. and then price reversed lower, but a very nice bullish opening drive. All right, let me do a quick check on the news. So Trump says, we have formed a framework of a future deal with respect to Greenland. Will not be imposing tariffs that were scheduled to go into effect on February 1st. So I don't know why anyone pays any attention to Trump's tariff announcements. He always changes his mind. Again, I don't know why anybody pays attention to that. The sell-off in futures on Monday, and then stocks and futures yesterday was just totally useless. All right, so anyway, that's the news. Zoom out. All right, so the call buyers coming in. All right, so equities, with that move higher, again, traders were selling puts, started buying calls right around 9:45, and then price move higher. Let's take a look at Trace. So SPX now trading just below 68.73, just below that, around that high the day before. All right, so that's the S&P 500. Let's take a look at Nasdaq. We'll take a look at some stocks. Then we'll get to live market. So let's go back to Hero. We'll go back to Nasdaq. So Nasdaq, just like the S&P 500, there are two signals that we can take a look at. There's the Nasdaq index signal, which we're showing here, showing options trades and market maker hedging activity. For the Nasdaq index components, we've already taken a look at those, QQQ and NDX. So the white line is price for NDX. And again, the orange line shows calls, blue line shows puts. So in the morning, traders were buying calls and selling puts in the Nasdaq index components. And just like the S&P 500, there are two signals that we can take a look at. For the Nasdaq, there's also the Mag 7 signal, although some of these stocks are not necessarily in favor right now. And we'll take a look at some stocks that are in favor in just a minute. All right, so traders, again, selling puts from the open, started buying calls right around 9:45. Nasdaq move higher. All right, back to Bookmap. All right, so remember in the ES, large traders were fading this move with iceberg orders starting about 8 a.m. maybe 9 a.m. All right, and Nasdaq, large traders were initially buying the move, so they were buying strength. You can see all the green volume dots. The volume dots of Bookmap show market buy minus sell. Aggressive buyers start to come in when the news comes out. Nice pullback again to the 25,000 level just after the open, setting up a nice entry point for a long up to the 25,200 level. A little bit of consolidation at that level. So from 9 a.m., that was about a 400-point move in NQ. So initially, large traders were buying the move, then they faded the move, then they started buying again. And then also buy stop orders fuel the move higher, shown by the yellow line, as well as aggressive buyers. So you can just see again all the green volume dots and rising cumulative volume delta, that's shown by the dark blue line. All right, so move now straight up after Trump's post on his social media platform. Sorry about the zooming. Up to a now around highs of the day. All right, so both Nasdaq and S&P 500 moving pretty sharply in a negative gamma environment. All right, let's take a look at some stocks, and we'll get to the live market. And there are a couple of what I wanted to look at today. There are a couple of Mag 7 stocks, and then one additional semiconductor stock that is kind of a go-to in bullish markets, and then a couple of storage, memory and data storage stocks, which are really in demand, very hot today. All right, so let's start with Google. Google, very bullish opening drive. Let's see what options traders are doing. Let's go to Google. Bullish opening drive. Classic pattern. Full alert comes in just after the open. Traders buying calls. Market makers sell the calls. They have to buy stock to hedge their delta exposure. And then they take the foot off the gas just before 11:30, and then price reverses lower, consolidates. Looks like it traded right around the 327.50 hedge wall. Note price did trade up above the 330 key gamma strike and is now still below that level. So classic bullish opening drive up to a somewhat of a call peak, combination between a call peak and call exhaustion, right around 11:20. 11:15 to 11:20. So let's go to Bookmap. So there's Google. Kind of a bearish opening print, and then aggressive buyers start to come in, shown by all the green volume dots, rising cumulative volume delta. That's the pink to or magenta to dark blue line. Cumulative volume delta levels off. And then price consolidates again as the call buyers took their foot off the gas. Remember 327.50, that's right around here, is the hedge wall. And price was consolidating around that level. And the other indicator I have in the subchart here is the Market Pulse price change indicator. So the Market Pulse has a number of algorithms. I like price change, and I use that to help me time entries for a long or entries in any trend, pullback entries, deeper pullback entries. There's the one that lines up with a deeper pullback entry. All right, so that's Google. Very strong bullish opening drive that lasted almost 2 hours. So plenty of opportunity to get long there in the bullish opening drive in Google. All right, the other Mag 7 stock I want to take a look at is NVDA. All right, NVIDIA back near highs of the day. NVIDIA 180 is the hedge wall key gamma strike. There was that level did act as resistance, then support today, and a good launching point, lining up with Market Pulse price change extreme for an entry point for long. Ultimate target for today is the 185 liquidity. That's shown by the bright shading in the heat map here. Heat map and Bookmap shows a history of limited orders in the order book. above price. Those are limit sell orders. Those are passive orders. Traders waiting to sell NVIDIA at that price, and that liquidity tends to act as a magnet for price. So price moves higher if it breaks above the 184 liquidity. Next target up above would be 185. Let's see what options traders were doing today. Back to Hero. Let's go to NVIDIA. All right, here's the 180 hedge wall key gamma strike, acting as resistance, then support. Entry point for long. Traders were selling a few puts. Then the call buyers came in aggressively right around 9:45. That time should look familiar. Same as the indexes, 9:45 call buyers came in. We're into indexes, again, NVIDIA, big component. Call exhaustion, call peak, right around 11:15. NVIDIA reverse lower, traded down below the 180 level, and now kind of making a big saucer here, moving back up toward highs of the day. And traders have resumed buying calls. So that's NVIDIA. Note all the green volume dots from the open. A lot of traders buying NVIDIA shares, a lot of aggressive buyers. And again, pullback entries lining up with the market pulse price change extremes. Pretty good, reliable entry points for a long in this case. Deep pullbacks and a trend. All right, so NVIDIA looks like the liquidity at 184 has been consumed. And now next target up above is 185. We'll come back and check on that in just a couple of minutes. All right, so let's take a look at another semiconductor stock now. AMD. Very strong today. Another bullish opening drive. Let's see what options traders are doing. Go to AMD. Call buyers get going right around 9:45. Again, when traders buy calls, market makers sell the calls. They have to buy stock that has their delta exposure. And initially, AMD broke up above the 250 call wall. And as the call buyers took the foot off the gas, AMD did trade down below that level. And now it looks like it's trading just below the 250 call wall. So bullish opening drive. Traders buy calls up to a call exhaustion pattern. And that's when AMD moved lower. When that fuel that had been driving price higher was gone, AMD moved lower and now has recovered back to the 250 call wall. Let's take a look at Bookmap. Series of higher lows up to the 250 call wall and above. Looks like liquidity right around 253. That was the peak. And then that's when cumulative volume delta started to flatten out. And also again, the traders stopped buying calls. The fuel that had driven price higher was gone. All right, so that's AMD, another bullish opening drive. And now testing the 250 call wall from below. And then there are still bands of liquidity up between 253 and 252. All right, now let's move on. Let's take a look at a couple of other stocks. We'll go to, first of all, memory, high bandwidth memory, Micron. Another bullish opening drive, Micron trading up near highs of the day. Let's see what options traders have been doing in Micron. And as expected, aggressive call buyers. Show them the rising orange line, also some put sellers. Full alert comes in just after the cash open. Traders buy calls, market makers sell the calls. Aggressively, up until about 10:45, call buyers slow down, price slows down, and then they take the foot off the gas, and Micron consolidates. So more of a call exhaustion pattern. Also the put sellers took their foot off the gas, started buying a few puts, maybe taking profits. And the 400 call wall so far remains untouched up above, but that would be the next target. So Micron trading at 392.93 right now, and call wall, next target up above. Let's go back to Bookmap. So let's see what kind of liquidity is sitting there at 400. All right, so that looks like the largest liquidity strike at 400. With 54,000, around 54,700 limit sell orders at that level. All right, that's Micron, bullish opening drive, aggressive buyers, call buyers, put sellers, all driving price higher. And potentially up toward 400. Finally, Western Digital. So for memory to storage, also very, very strong stock recently. And for Western Digital, 230 is the key gamma strike. Nice entry point for a long this morning. Also lines up with the market pulse price change extreme. Red part of the line there. Let's see what options traders are doing on Western Digital. Looks like the call buyers maybe we're playing a little bit of a catch up, but they really got going somewhere between 9:45 and 10 as Western Digital broke up above the 230 key gamma strike. And again, remember that looked like to me a good entry point for long, with the call wall target at 250. And then another call exhaustion pattern. And this lasted almost to noon. So another bullish drive that lasted about 2 hours, giving you plenty of opportunity to enter on the long side. All right, next target up above is the 250 level, and that is the next high liquidity target up above. All right, anyone have any stocks they want me to take a look at? Any questions, comments? All right, let's get back to the indexes. And oops, I have the wrong label there on in my chart. Let's see. Let me fix that. Whoops. All right, that should update in about a minute. All right, so strong move higher. So it sounds like Greenland is potentially off the table, out of the news now with a framework reached. So that didn't take long. And looks like S&P 500 heading up toward the volatility trigger at 69.25. Let's check Hero. Let's zoom in on this. So remember before the SPY 685 volatility trigger, around that level was resistance, a little bit of consolidation in that level, but then the S&P 500 took off. All right, so a few sellers coming in now. Let's check Trace. We'll check Hero and Trace. I'm going to shift to the total signal, go back to the S&P 500 index signal. All right, flow alert just came in. And that could be a signal for potential reversal in hedging flow. So we'll keep an eye on that. This does not mean, this flow alert does not mean that price is going to immediately reverse. It gets my attention to look for potential reversal in hedging flow. From this case, positive delta to negative delta. But again, it does not mean sell right away or take any action. It just gets your attention. Let's check the equity signal. It continues to move higher. Let's check Trace. All right, now the 68.75 is well below. Next level of gamma is 6,900. And that's a 97 percentile strike. All right, so it looks like SPX is slowing down right around that 6,900 level. So back to Bookmap. So here's 6,900. That was noted as resistance in the SpotGamma AM Founders Note. Let's tone down the heat map just a little bit. All right, so now SPX trading, ES trading, SPX trading just around the 6,900 level. Let's confirm that. So yeah, this is showing SPX did trade up above 6,900 and now right at that level. And that is a large gamma 3 level. All right, back to Hero and Trace. All right, 6,900. 97 percentile strike. Check Hero. The S&P 500 index signal. And looks like now it's slowing down. Right at 6,900. Keep an eye on that. All right, Hero slowing down. Price consolidating around 6,900. Let's go back. Let's check the charm pressure. All right, so right now, SPX is in this red zone of selling pressure due to time decay. So I was looking for a potential pin target. I do not see it right now. Potential pin target would be somewhere like this, with blue buying support below, red selling pressure up above. Back to Gamma. SPX still in negative Gamma, red shading and consolidating. Looks like now trading up above the 6,900 level. Zoom in on this. And Gurdeep, welcome. Glad you're here. Gurdeep asks, do you think that big move in ES were driven by option flow or hedging activity? Yeah, sure. So those are the one and the same thing. So hedging activity is in response to options flow. And that's what drives price. When traders take positive delta positions in SPX and SPY, market makers take negative delta positions in SPX and SPY, and they have to buy ES futures to hedge their delta exposure, and that can drive price higher. All right, SPX looks like still wants to move higher. Let's go back and check Hero again. All right, so Hero has slowed down, but still trending higher for the S&P 500 index. All right, I've got a couple of minutes left. Just want to remind everyone that I will be streaming on Friday, since Monday was a holiday, and I will be back at my normal time, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. All right, back to Bookmap. Pretty exciting day today. A couple of nice bullish moves. In response to news. And this is pretty spectacular this afternoon. From the SPY 680 level to 688. So that's over 80 points in ES SPX. Check Nasdaq. Also trading well above highs. So Nasdaq so far today about a 450 point move higher. All right, last call. Questions, comments? All right, everyone, have a great afternoon. Thank you very much for joining me and watching this afternoon. Remember, I will be streaming on Friday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and I hope to see you then. All right, thanks again, everyone. Have a great afternoon, and I will see you on Friday. Bye.